The Godwin Manuscript. The manuscript was discovered in 1998, tucked between the pages of a decaying copy of Frankenstein in the private library of the Godwin family home in London. The yellowed pages, penned in Mary Shelley's delicate yet firm hand, contained words that should never have seen the light of day. They were the final confessions of a woman who, at 50, faced death with the same intellectual courage that had made her one of the most revolutionary writers of her time. This was not fiction, but intimate revelations about experiences that transcended the bounds of reason. Visions, spiritual encounters, and truths about the nature of the soul she had kept secret for decades. Mary Shelley wrote these pages in the winter of 1847, a few months before her death. Her health was rapidly failing, and she knew time was running out. But it was in this proximity to death that something extraordinary began to happen. The barriers between worlds seemed thinner, and the woman who had given life to Frankenstein's monster was about to discover that true resurrection didn't happen in laboratories, but in the invisible dimensions of existence. For years, Mary had carried the weight of devastating losses. Her mother, the feminist pioneer Mary Wollstonecraft, died days after her birth. Percy Bysshe Shelley, her husband and great love, drowned in the Mediterranean when she was only 25. 3 of her 4 children died in infancy. Life had become a graveyard of interrupted dreams, and she walked among the shadows of an existence marked by genius and tragedy in equal measure. But something shifted that winter of 1847. Mary began to recount experiences that defied everything she believed about the nature of reality. In her words, written with an almost feverish urgency, she described nocturnal visitations from familiar figures, voices whispering through the chilling London winds, and a growing certainty that death was not the end, but merely a transition to a higher state of consciousness. The first supernatural experience occurred on a December night when Mary awoke with the feeling of not being alone in her room. She described a feminine presence, delicate yet powerful, that gradually manifested as a golden light hovering in the air. It wasn't a hallucination caused by fever or medication. Mary was lucid, alert, and completely aware that she was experiencing something beyond the limits of ordinary perception. The figure began to take shape, revealing the familiar contours of a woman she recognized instantly, even though she had never seen her in life. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. The maternal presence didn't speak with words, but communicated through direct impressions on Mary's mind. She felt a wave of unconditional love, a profound understanding that all the suffering she had endured was part of a larger plan, an evolutionary journey that transcended the limits of a single existence. Mary Wollstonecraft, the woman who had fought for women's rights and died defending her convictions, was there to reveal to her daughter that death hadn't interrupted her mission, but had expanded it into unimaginable dimensions. During that extraordinary encounter, Mary understood that her own work, especially Frankenstein, had not been merely a literary creation, but a prophecy about humanity's future. The story of Dr. Victor Frankenstein and his creature wasn't a metaphor about the dangers of uncontrolled science, but a symbolic vision of the dual nature of human existence, the desire to transcend death and the responsibility that entails. She had been chosen to plant a seed in humanity's collective consciousness, preparing it for truths that would only be understood generations later. In the following days, other presences began to manifest. Percy Shelley appeared on a misty afternoon, his ethereal form floating between the curtains of her study. He was no longer the rebellious young poet she had loved, but an expanded consciousness that had grasped the mysteries of existence. Through him, Mary discovered that true love doesn't die with the body, but transforms into a creative force that continues to influence the physical world through invisible dimensions. Percy revealed that his death at sea had not been an accident, but a choice of the soul to accelerate his own spiritual evolution. He had completed his earthly mission, inspiring a generation of poets and thinkers to question society's rigid structures, and was ready for the next stage of his journey. But his connection with Mary remained intact, and he had been by her during all the moments of suffering and loneliness she had faced. The most unsettling revelation came through her deceased children. William, Clara, and Charles appeared together on a January night, their childlike forms radiating a wisdom that transcended age. They explained that their premature deaths had not been punishments or meaningless tragedies, but choices made on higher levels of consciousness. Every soul that enters the physical world has a specific mission, and some missions can be fulfilled in a few years or even months. The duration of earthly life doesn't determine the value or impact of an existence. Mary's children revealed that they had chosen to be born into her family not only to experience maternal love, but to help her develop the compassion and emotional depth that made her writing so powerful. Every loss she had suffered had expanded her capacity to understand human suffering, transforming her into a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The most impactful revelation came from William Blake, the visionary poet who had died a few years earlier. Blake appeared one March afternoon, his presence radiating an energy that made the air vibrate with invisible colors. He had been a seer throughout his earthly life, able to perceive angels and demons with the same clarity as the physical world. Through him, Mary discovered that reality was far vaster and more complex than any human mind could comprehend. Blake revealed that infinite dimensions of consciousness existed, each vibrating at a different frequency. The physical world was just one of these dimensions, perhaps the densest and most limited. When a person died, their consciousness didn't disappear, but migrated to higher dimensions, where spiritual evolution continued. Mary's understanding of reality expanded with each visitation. She realized her sensitivity to spiritual presences wasn't new, but a capacity gradually awakened throughout her life. As a child, she had felt her mother's presence, even without understanding what she was experiencing. During adolescence, she had prophetic dreams that came true weeks or months later. And in adulthood, especially during times of great sorrow, she'd felt a comforting presence she now recognized as Percy's. But it was only as she neared death that these spiritual gifts manifested with total clarity. It was as if the proximity to the final transition had removed the veil separating dimensions, allowing her to see reality as it truly was, an infinite web of interconnected consciousnesses evolving through time and space in a cosmic dance of love and learning. In her final confessions, Mary described an experience that forever changed her understanding of death. One April night, when her physical condition had deteriorated significantly, she had an out-of-body experience. Her consciousness separated from her physical form and rose above London, allowing her to see the city from a completely new perspective. Death, the presence revealed, wasn't an end, but the beginning of a new phase of the journey. When a consciousness left the physical body, it was received by spiritual guides who helped it understand and integrate all experiences from the life just ended. This review and integration process could last what humans perceived as years or decades, but in reality, it happened outside linear time, in a dimension where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. During this experience, Mary understood that her earthly mission was drawing to a close. She had fulfilled her purpose of planting seeds of questioning in the human consciousness through her literary work. Frankenstein would continue to influence future generations, inspiring reflections on the nature of life, death, and human responsibility. But her most important contribution wasn't the creation of a horror story, but the opening of a portal in humanity's collective imagination. Through her monstrous creation, Mary had forced her readers to confront fundamental questions about the nature of existence. What made someone human? What was the creator's responsibility to their creation? Was it possible to transcend death through science, or did this require a deeper understanding of the spiritual nature of life? These questions would continue to resonate through the centuries, preparing humanity for future revelations about the true nature of reality. She saw humanity as a single collective consciousness, experiencing itself through billions of individual perspectives. Each person was simultaneously a unique being and part of a larger whole, like cells in an infinite organism. Individual experiences, birth, growth, love, loss, death, were all parts of a larger process of spiritual evolution that transcended any individual life. Art, literature, music, poetry, all forms of creative expression were attempts by the universal consciousness to understand itself through human experience. Artists were especially sensitive antennae that picked up vibrations from higher dimensions and translated them into forms that other human beings could understand and feel. Each work of art was a message from the infinite, encoded in a language that spoke directly to the heart and soul. Mary understood that Frankenstein had been one of those messages. Through the story of Dr. Victor Frankenstein and his creature, she had conveyed a fundamental truth about the nature of creation and spiritual responsibility. The story wasn't a warning against the dangers of science, but a revelation about the power of consciousness to give life to inert matter. Frankenstein wasn't just a mad scientist, but a symbol of the universal consciousness itself, experimenting with the possibilities of existence. The monstrous creature, in turn, represented all the rejected or denied aspects of human nature. It was powerful, intelligent, capable of love and compassion, but also of hatred and revenge. Its rejection by society symbolized the human tendency to deny or repress parts of itself that didn't fit into accepted patterns. The tragedy of the story wasn't the creation of the creature, but the creator's inability to take responsibility for it and harmoniously integrate it into existence. In her final days, Mary began receiving visits from consciousnesses that hadn't had a human physical existence. They were beings of light inhabiting higher dimensions, spiritual guides who had accompanied humanity's evolution since its beginnings. Earth was a spiritual school, a place where souls came to learn specific lessons about love, compassion, forgiveness, and responsibility. Each era of human history was overseen by groups of spiritual beings who inspired discoveries, artistic creations, and evolutionary advancements that prepared humanity for new phases of development. The Romantic era in which Mary had lived had been a period of opening human sensitivity to subtler dimensions of reality. Poets like Byron, Shelley, and Keats had been conscious channels of this spiritual influence, as were artists and musicians of their time. Mary discovered that her own mission was specific and unique. She had been chosen to create a work that would remain relevant through the centuries, evolving in meaning as humanity progressed in its spiritual understanding. Frankenstein would be reinterpreted by each generation, revealing deeper layers of meaning as human consciousness expanded. The deepest revelation came in the form of an understanding of the nature of time and eternity. Mary realized that all her experiences, past, present, and future, existed simultaneously in a timeless dimension. Her childhood, her youth, her adult life, and her death weren't sequential events, but different aspects of a single multidimensional reality. She could perceive her own consciousness extending through time, connecting with versions of herself that existed in different moments and dimensions. Through this expanded perception, Mary understood that death wasn't a transition to a different state, but an expansion of consciousness that revealed the true nature of existence. What humans called the afterlife was simply a broader perception of the multidimensional reality in which they were already immersed. Individual consciousness didn't die, but expanded to encompass vaster perspectives while retaining its unique identity.
During her final weeks of physical life, Mary experienced moments of transcendental lucidity in which she could simultaneously perceive her current existence and her future states of consciousness. She saw how her influence would continue to spread through generations, inspiring writers, scientists, philosophers, and spiritual seekers to question the nature of reality and explore the boundaries between life and death. Mary realized that Frankenstein would become prophetic in ways she herself hadn't imagined. Humanity would develop technologies allowing genetic manipulation, the creation of artificial intelligence, and even the possibility of consciousness transfer between different physical substrates.
Each scientific advance would bring back the fundamental questions she had raised. What truly makes us human? What is our responsibility towards our creations? How can we use our creative power wisely and compassionately? In her final reflections, Mary understood that true resurrection didn't happen through the reanimation of dead bodies, but through the expansion of consciousness beyond the limitations of physical form. Every work of art, every act of love, every moment of compassion were forms of resurrection, ways in which consciousness transcended death and perpetuated itself through time and space. Frankenstein's creature, from this perspective, represented the infinite potential of human consciousness. It was powerfully beyond measure, capable of extraordinary feats, but also profoundly lonely and seeking connection and understanding. Its monstrous appearance symbolizes how society reacts to the unknown, the different, that which challenges its limited conceptions of reality's nature. Mary realized her own life had been an embodiment of this theme. She had been a woman creating literature in a man's world, a brilliant mind questioning societal limitations, a sensitive soul navigating devastating losses. Like her own creature, she had often been misunderstood, sometimes rejected, but always persistent in her mission to expand the boundaries of human consciousness. Mary's final experience was a complete merger with universal consciousness. She felt her individual identity expand to encompass all life forms, all dimensions of existence, all possible universes. In this moment of total unity, she understood that every being, every object, every particle of matter was an expression of the same infinite consciousness exploring its own possibilities. The love she had felt for Percy, for her children, for her mother, hadn't been lost with their deaths, but had transformed into a creative force that continued shaping reality. Every person who read Frankenstein and was touched by its depth was participating in this continuity of love through time and space. Mary perceived that true immortality didn't reside in the preservation of physical form, but in the perpetuation of spiritual influence. Each consciousness touching other consciousnesses created waves of transformation that propagated infinitely through the web of existence. Her own death would only be a transition to a more expanded form of influence, where she could continue inspiring and guiding those seeking to understand life's and death's mysteries. In her last moments of physical consciousness, Mary experienced a final revelation about the nature of creation. She saw that the entire universe was a constantly evolving work of art, created by an infinite consciousness exploring its own possibilities. Each life was a brushstroke in this cosmic artwork, each experience a note in a universal symphony, each death a transformation adding new depth and complexity to the whole. Frankenstein had been her contribution to this infinite creation, a story that would continue evolving and revealing new meanings as human consciousness expanded. The monstrous creature and its tormented creator would remain eternal symbols of humanity's quest for transcendence and the responsibility accompanying creative power. Mary's final revelation was that death wasn't the opposite of life, but its necessary complement. Without death, there would be no transformation, growth, or evolution.
Death was the force allowing consciousness to continually reinvent itself, exploring new possibilities and expanding into ever vaster dimensions of existence. When Mary Shelley died on February 1st, 1851, she didn't disappear, but transformed. Her consciousness expanded to dimensions transcending time and space, but her influence on the physical world continued to grow. Frankenstein became one of the most influential works of world literature, inspiring countless adaptations, interpretations, and reflections on humanity's nature. Mary's secret confessions, discovered over a century after her death, reveal a truth she had understood in her final days. Death isn't the journey's end, but the beginning of an infinite adventure through the dimensions of consciousness. Her monstrous creature had been a prophecy about the unlimited potential of the human soul, its capacity to transcend the limitations of physical form and explore realities defying all rational understanding. True resurrection doesn't happen in laboratories or through advanced technologies, but through the expansion of consciousness beyond the boundaries of death. It's a transformation each soul experiences when abandoning physical form and discovering that life is infinitely vaster and more mysterious than any human mind could imagine. Mary Shelley had created more than a horror story. She had opened a door to understanding the eternal nature of consciousness. Her monstrous and lonely creature was, in fact, a reflection of the human soul itself, seeking meaning, connection, and transcendence in a universe that is simultaneously physical and spiritual, temporal and universal, individual and universal. Mary's journey through life and death reveals that we are all creators and creatures, shaping and being shaped by the infinite web of existence. Every act of love, every moment of creativity, every quest for understanding adds new dimension to the cosmic artwork that is reality itself. And when we reach the end of our earthly journey, we discover it's not truly an end, but a graduation to higher levels of being and consciousness. The truth Mary Shelley uncovered in her final days remains a guiding light for all who seek to understand the mystery of existence. We are eternal beings having a temporary experience, infinite consciousnesses exploring the possibilities of form, sparks of divinity discovering our own nature through the human journey. Death is not the opposite of life, but its expansion into dimensions of reality that transcend anything we can imagine in our current physical state. This is the true revelation Mary Shelley left hidden in her secret confessions. The afterlife is not a belief or a hope, but a fundamental reality of existence. We are immortal by nature, eternal in essence, and our journey through time and space is merely the first chapter of a story that extends infinitely through the dimensions of universal consciousness.